Hello, I'm Des Dearlove, co-founder of Thinkers50, and I'd like to welcome you to Thinkers50 at Hult, a collaboration between Thinkers50 and Hult International Business School. For those of you who are less familiar with Thinkers50, our mission is to be the world's most reliable resource for identifying, ranking, and sharing the leading management and business ideas of our age, ideas that can make a positive difference in the world. In this series of webinars, we are showcasing some of the world-class business thinkers among the Hult faculty. We aim to make these sessions as interactive as possible, so please do let us know in the chat where you are joining from today and send over your questions, reflections, observations at any time during the session. Our guest today is Dr. Mark Esposito. Mark is a professor of business and economics at Hult International Business School and director of Hult's Futures Lab. He's recognized as a global thought leader in matters relating to the fourth industrial revolution and the changes and opportunities that the new technology brings. His forthcoming book, co-authored with Olaf Groth and Terence Say, is The Great Remobilization: Strategies and Designs for a Smarter World. And in it, the three authors analyze the 5C tectonic forces disrupting our fragile and unpredictable world. And they chart a strategic roadmap for leaders who want to help shape the new operating logic for a smarter, more resilient future. Mark, great to see you.
Great to see you, Des.
Tell us, we're going to talk about the book. Obviously, we're going to talk about the book. But tell us a little bit about how you got here. Tell us about just a short piece about the journey, what ignited your passion for technology in the fourth industrial revolution.
So first of all, nice to see you again, and another conversation that we have. And thanks for having me in this series. It all started, I think, in the period of time 2015, 16. A few events happened. I did more and more work with the World Economic Forum. And so I was getting more and more acquainted with the big think narrative that the forum is bringing forward. Together with Terence, that we put actually a book out, which was the Drive Framework, which was also shortlisted for Thinker50 Book Awards, right? And Drive was the very first time where we really started to understand that there were forces of transformation that were largely changing the tenets, so to say. Within one of those forces, technology was becoming a prominent one. And so we started to go deeper. So a couple of things happened out of this. So the spillover started. We co-founded a machine learning company called Nexus Frontier Tech. And that became for us almost like our learning on the field of what technology really is when you try to run it commercially. And then we had another book, was the AI Republic, where we wanted to bring a strong conversation forward, such as let's try to diffuse, democratize artificial intelligence. This doesn't have to be proprietary per se, it has to be diffused. And that, I think, is what really led us to where we were in 2020. And then COVID happened, and we were starting to write more about how do we help organizations to assess their resilience. And that's when the book project started. And we were quite lucky that after a few iterations, the MIT Press decided to take the project on board. And then it became what it will be, the book in October when it gets out.
Yeah, no, I should have said it's forthcoming. The book's out. For everybody listening, the book is out in October 2023. But we're going to get a sneak peek of what's inside. Because Mark's going to give us some clues as to what the book's about. But you, just going back as just one step, you seem to have a happy knack of being ahead of the curve. Because when you were writing AI Republic, everyone's talking AI now. It's the biggest thing, going. But that book was a couple of years ago. You seem to be ahead of the curve in seeing that trend and realizing the implications of it.
I think that's when we started to do a little bit more of a serious work on trends. We tap on the power of anticipation. And I think there is a lot of, what the real Miller that was at the UNESCO called the anticipatory systems, the ability to see the future as it unfolds by simply looking at the present. We are not futurists, neither have a crystal ball. But I think if you engage seriously in some form of, future literacy, at least allegedly so, you discover that there are tendencies that are now unfolding. They don't necessarily shape up into mainstream. Let's say that we learn how to recognize the noises that are somehow more meaningful, so we can hypothesize what likely could happen.
Okay. Well, as I say, it's a very happy knack. It's a good thing to be, to be able to see what's coming. I think, it positions you very well, allows you to do the research and get the book out at the right time, which is important. Now, one of the premises of your work and particularly of the new book is that something, that the brain is shaped by technology, and as well as technology being shaped by the human brain. Tell us a little bit about that, and then I want to explore the 5 C's as well, of course.
Yeah. So the book started somewhere else, but somehow when we started to have I would say a running logic on the book, we start realizing that we had already shifted somehow from what we call the digital era, where the digital infrastructure has been set up. And I think, from the time where the digital transformation jargon was introduced in the mainstream back in 2010 until now, I think we have heard multiple iteration of that. But we start feeling that it wasn't just about digital anymore, or digital components. It was more about cognitive. And so we started to look at the fact that cognitive era was so like becoming a much more powerful proposition. And that came by, I think, observing that the intimacy between humans and machine was becoming more explicit, that we started to have some form of symbiosis between humans and machines, ambiguity, of course, more doomsday scenario as well, where we were kind of afraid of the singularity or things that were like projecting the overpower of human brain by technology. So I think that narrative was, of course, feeding in the curiosity. But I think we started to say, this is going to be a period of our history where the integration between humans and machine will be a permanent one. And it won't necessarily be a fad that will phase out. It's just how do we rethink our architecture, considering the inevitability of this relationship.
I'm going to ask about the 5 C's in a second, but we are just to let you know, we've got a very global audience as usual. We've got people joining us from India, Germany, Switzerland, Poland, Denmark, New York City, San Francisco, Chicago, and Mexico, just to name a few places. Amazing. Just so you have an idea of the audience you're talking to.
It's amazing.
So let's begin to think. And by the way, people, please send in your questions for Mark. I'm going to explore the 5 C's, but I've got one eye on your questions as they come in. So please do send them in as they emerge at any point. So the 5 C's that are really driving the changes. You're going to talk us through them, perhaps one at a time?
Sure. So I think the overarching story about the cognitive era is really where we started to say this is an umbrella. It equally starts with C, and sometimes and for the ease of conversation, we even talk about 6 C's, but largely the cognitive tech is not a C per se. It's one of the, I think, dimension of reference that we are shifting into this different ecosystem. And so we started to realize that the driving forces of what we also call globalization 2.0, so like we're encapsulated by the C letter. So the first one is, and this is a name that I think has an historical legacy when we talk about COVID-19. It's not really the public health crisis that we have gone through. It's more the triggers that have occurred, almost like if COVID was an historical milestone that has triggered a number of things. So within that C, we largely discussed the expansion and the extension of the internet. What is fascinating is to discover that today the internet is bigger, faster, more diffuse globally, and largely due to the fact that COVID has pushed us into a digital environment on a regular basis. And so we kind of discovered as we were doing research, but equally the interviews, that in, let's say, most high-income economies, the internet today is close to 30% bigger than what we had prior to COVID. So the peer exchanges is how you measure this. And it means we're dealing with a larger infrastructure of exchange. And this is something that I think COVID has largely brought forward. And so we can say that COVID was also a digital revolution in that sense. When we started to understand COVID from a perspective of the instigation into the web, we started to realize that the web was equally changing its own chemistry from a concentrated web to a more diffuse web. So Web3, which I think we hear more and more these days, we talk about Web3 economies. And so like the premise of a more decentralized structure kind of happened on the cusp of an expanded internet, and at the same time, more dependency, reliance, and I would say acceptance of the crypto markets. And that goes into our second conversation of the C, crypto and blockchain. So we started to find out that finally blockchain was being emancipated to the kind of infrastructure it is. Largely, he had a secondary role because it was always affiliated with Bitcoin. Today, I think we hear less about Bitcoin, more about blockchain, more about crypto. And I think we are maturing the narrative more so that we understand there is more than one variance to the blockchain infrastructure than just Bitcoin. And that is, I think, a combination between Web3 expanding, decentralizing, and at the same time, blockchain and crypto generating a really strong value proposition. And I think this is rethinking not only money, but storage of value. How will we fundamentally tap on the fact that a lot of this decentralization comes with an increased amount of autonomy? And so other conversation that you probably pick here and there, that's on right now, so let's say on the radar of trends like decentralized autonomous organization, DAOs, or decentralized finance, DeFi, they're equally consequential to this expansion that we're seeing between COVID-19, expansion of the internet, and cryptocurrency. So these are the first two that have largely helped us understand the dimension of the transformation. I think we were at first just understanding or sensing a change, but we weren't really understanding the true dimension of it. And when we went deeper, we started to be able to define it better. And I think they were definitional for us.
I think a lot of people, obviously crypto, Bitcoin, as you say, I think, there was a sense of, the classic sort of, I was going to say gold rush, that sense of excitement and speculation that can happen at the beginning of a new technology. And now that perhaps some of the bubble has burst, people are beginning to realize that obviously it wasn't just about the cryptocurrencies. There's a lot more to this, particularly with the blockchain, and it is going to have, despite the kind of the hype about the cryptocurrencies, this is going to have a very significant and profound impact on the way that we do business and the way that we live our lives.
100%. That's I think the hype to some extent is behind us and is equally ahead of us. It looks very different, very different. And I think there's one of the things that we didn't necessarily cover extensively during the 5 Cs, but it became sort of like a tangent. When you're hearing more about the metaverse, you're kind of empowering a lot the conversation on blockchain to be a critical part of the constitution of a metaverse. Because if you think about how the metaverse will commercialize, which is on non-fungible tokens, these are cryptocurrencies that need to be hosted on a blockchain ledgers. It's just that I think it matured and evolved the conversation by almost like hiding the more technical jargon about crypto and blockchain, becoming much more strategic in thinking about this digital ecosystem. But we are now really upgrading blockchain and crypto to a functional level rather than just exploratory as it was before.
Okay, that's good. We're getting lots of questions coming in about AI, as you can imagine. But I want you to talk us through the remaining the other C's as well before we answer the questions. Well, let's set out the stall of the book. Yeah.
Just to make sure that there is like this fil rouge between the different C's. So once we went deeper into the conversation on crypto and blockchain, then we started to see that as a downside, the moment that a large part of our value is stored in digital assets, we start having issues about how do we protect this. And so the third C, cybersecurity, popped up. largely underdeveloped in terms of the capacity that we need to address this. Significant part of our global economy is now shifting to intangible assets. And this mainly means that protecting what is important for us is no longer a physical capacity. The idea of a vault or of a bank that now is shutting down their doors doesn't really mean much anymore. Value is now in data, is in servers, is of course in sensitive information. And so in cryptocurrency, we understood that the creation of value was also becoming exponential, but equally the danger that comes with cryptocurrency. And so, with cybersecurity. So cybersecurity coming from, I think, a more primitive approach or rudimentary about a firewall or zero trust, where we were trying to really avoid transaction we would not authorize or recognize, or firewalls. I remember growing up by trying to figure out a firewall on my laptops, right? And there was viruses and all of that. And I think that narrative was about there is a fortress, which is a firewall. We will protect you from attacks. And today we start realizing that because of the pervasiveness of triangulation, we're much more exposed than simply having a wall around our let's say precious assets. And so we started to realize that that cybersecurity will rise as a critical component of national strategies, companies' major, I would say, priorities. And it actually, anecdotally, was running a keynote in Amsterdam a few weeks back, and I remember that we were talking about the 5 Cs. At the end of my session, there was a Q&A, and a gentleman who was in charge of the IT security of the company said, well, thank you for having brought up cybersecurity. Just want to make sure everybody knows that we receive roughly 10,000 attacks per month.
Whoa.
And so this is becoming, I think, a reality for many security, I would say, professionally in cyber. We will probably see a significant rise of policy frameworks and, I say, access to resources in cybersecurity, but that really constituted our understanding of the third C, what's cybersecurity. And so where do we go from here? Well, we started to think, well, do we see some of this exploration leading in a certain way? And the first inkling that something was really shaping up was when we started to understand that the carbon economy, or otherwise also a different way to understand the climate agenda, was largely empowered by this technology. So we started to discover carbon credits on ledgers that were exchanging for data markets. And that's when we understood that in the climate, the climate change conversation, had seen probably an evolution from the previous logic of climate change, reversibility, reduction of emissions, much more into I would say, a proactive proposition, such as we need to have a carbon economy that will decarbonize, dematerialize, measure, track, audit, exchange. We started to hear about technologies that were mitigating climate. We started to have conversation. We interview people, one of them, for example, Parakana, right? The idea about how do we integrate technology like AI to model what could be the impact of climate on real estate. So we started to realize that climate mitigation and climate adaptation were becoming much better, I would say, ideas to explore than the narrative on climate change, which is kind of old news. It feels old news, and largely, I would say, failed, because we haven't really been able to address globally the needs for us to move us past the challenges we have with planetary boundaries. And so I think this is where we started to realize the climate was becoming another leading plot of our stories. And to finish on this, when we started to understand all of this, we started to also understand that technology was largely shaping geotech, geopolitics, somehow a bit of the Ian Bremmer conversation about how do we see a new world order. And China popped up. It popped up because of the tensions with China. It popped up because we were exploring the supply chain hiccups. It popped up because we started to hear more and more seriously the de-dollarization and how China is going to enter into markets that will try to seek an alternative to the dollars. It popped up because we had alternative to the World Bank in the Asia infrastructure investment banks. We had, significant level of investment in infrastructure like the Belt Road Initiative. So everything was pointing as China as a new form of governance on a macro level, and actually started with C as well. So a bit of lucky charms to find a lot of these spots under the C letters, right?
No, I think it's really interesting how because we're talking crypto and the flip side, cyber attacks, and cybersecurity, which is sort of technology driven. You've got climate change, which is obviously sort of planetary and affected by old technologies largely, and then you're into the sort of the geopolitics and China. So it's a very interesting and potent mix, I have to say. I am going to ask you some questions about AI, but we will come back to the book, I promise. I'm just aware that there's a lot of questions here.
Sure.
So Frank Karlberg is asking, well, a bunch of things, actually. Frank joins us most weeks, and it's always great to see him here. But he's on the AI ticket today. He's asking, let me start actually by asking you, Mark. Yeah. This isn't Frank's question. This is my question to you. Are you sort of positive about AI generally? I mean, or are you, kind of gloom and doom?
I am more of techno optimist, as I always been since we started to write about this. I found that there is a kind of a cute mismatch. I call it cute because sometimes a large part of my conversation when I, for example, teach on AI, it's about demystifying what AI is not, right? And I still find that it gives still me leeway. I can spend a good part of my first class by trying to tell people what AI is not. And running an AI company gave me a lot of learning from the field. Fundamentally, when you're looking at how you run an AI process, you sort of like recognize the advanced statistics and the computational power. You don't necessarily tinker with the idea of intelligence per se. So it doesn't feel that you're dealing with an independent, autonomous form of intelligence. But you're definitely looking at an incredible set of technologies. They're capable of mimicking some function of the brain. So I'm not afraid. I'm much more concerned about the mismanagement of the conversation on AI from our side. I'm concerned about the fact that we're not understanding data and the fact that we can be algorithmically very predictive. And therefore, I can easily condition not only my consumers' behavior, but equally my political sentiment. And that is, of course, is a challenge that we already seen experienced before. Yeah. So still optimist, but I would say vigilant, not necessarily too much on the technology, but on the management of technology, which is where I tend to see some flows somehow.
Okay, now I'm going to come back to one of Frank's questions is, I mean, obviously you're in the world of education at Hult. He's asking specifically, what are we going to see in terms of how AI is going to impact on education, including generative AI? Yeah.
Frank, thanks for this question. At Hult, but also elsewhere, I have started to see, I would say, an engaged conversation on generative AI, which is kind of like the debate right now, because we are always talking about it more and more, integrated into curricula, skill sets, and all of that. So I think largely we will start noticing that this will become normalized in many of our processes. We will probably start having some form of generative AI in assignments. We'll probably discover where we can really lift the use potential that schools have with their students to try to get them go faster. And I think there was an interesting quote sometimes back, and I can't remember who said this, which was saying, it's not that we had to fear generative AI versus jobs, is how do we start redesigning jobs that are using generative AI to go faster. I think schools will probably realize that by integrating the right kind of skill sets in this kind of technology, we're also changing the spectrum of the job market. And this is where school probably will play up their next employability card. building people that are employable with a future ready or future fit touch. And I think largely, if we do this, I mean, I trust Hult can do that. It's been historically an entrepreneurial school. But I think in general, business schools can truly try to tap on the integration of this technology and rethinking how do we teach, how do we assign tasks, and how do we tap on, I would say, a quite dormant talent that sometimes is kept busy on tasks that might be pedagogically sound. But now I think we had to go beyond this. And so I find it to be a right time for this conversation around technologies and education to be placed, because the time is quite propitious with this.
It's interesting. A few years ago, I used to take some comfort from the fact that when we talked about automation and we talked about AI, it felt like the creative industries, writers and journalists, were untouchable. It turns out not to be the case, by the way, as we all realize now. What about teachers then? Are you likely to be replaced anytime soon?
So look, I had this conversation, I think, sometimes back when we started to see online universities taking over, and then there was a conversation about pre-recorded content. So on a personal level, but I'm talking about a number of different colleagues, and many are also within the network or Thinker50 desk. So actually, our role have expanded in the last few years rather than downsize. I think technology as a form of digital component in my job has expanded my voice. Things like that we're doing right now is a webinar that we're doing in 2 different locations and 2 different time zones with people connecting from all over the world, is a way of exploring ideas for more people at the same time. We do teach hybrid, and there are circumstances where I have a cohort in class and a cohort online, and I just realized that you have to calibrate for 2 very different class dynamics. This is a skill that I didn't have before. I never had to face this before. I also have worked with Harvard since many years. And so at Harvard, there is a classroom that now is being set up with hybrid. And I was able to tour it last summer when they were finishing the works. And it's entirely interactive by taking into account that what happens online, what happens in person is different. But how do we now orchestrate the experience? I think this question are new questions that we're exploring that are possible because we are now exploring the synergy between technologies and education. So not particularly concerned about displacement of labor like teachers in the next few years. I also have to say that the comeback of many physical activities has really demonstrated that it wasn't about one thing in lieu of the other. It was just expanding the experience palette to more things. Like we can have a conversation like this, but when we see each other in November at the Thinker50 Gala, it will be in a physical location, right? And that's both part, I think, what we've been expanded by the experience. So I'm only hoping the trend will continue to happen rather than the fear that this might impact the employability of a teacher.
I mean, one of the reasons that Thinkers50 that we always prefer to have these conversations rather than let you run through your slides is because, to some extent, that's the same performance when you not saying in your case, but it's the questions and it's the different directions that the conversation goes in, which gets a unique response, we hope, when we run a session. That's why we deliberately try to knock people off their usual speech or their usual spiel, right. and wherever possible we stop them from using slides, because we want the insights. And quite often the insights happen when there's a spark between either somebody in the audience asking a question or 2 of the thinkers together. We try to put them together in conversation.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. So no, just expanding from your point about how teachers and how the education field might be affected. We've got a question from Rima here, who asks how other traditional businesses can leverage AI, like architecture and renovation businesses, more kind of traditional fields.
Right. So that's a very interesting question, quite unconventional, I have to say. So I'm happy Rima asked this. So Rima, one of the things that likely can happen, I'm not sure whether it's AI, but I think it's fundamentally this technological package that is coming with the cognitive era, is the fact that, and this is where the idea of digital twin is very powerful. We can start mimicking and emulating the physical into the digital by running multiple experiments, because you want to run it according to what is important for you. It can be studying energy consumption. It can be determining flow. Take, for example, an airport. I travel extensively, and I'm always asking myself the same question: could we design this experience better? I think we all come across bottlenecks. Either is in the security checks, either is in the passport control, even boarding a plane. I feel there is a better way for us to imagine, can we board a plane better, right? And let's say the answer is let's explore. In the physical world, that tends to cost a lot of resources. In the digital one, that becomes multiple form of simulations that you can run to try to really understand in digital format what could happen in the physical one. So I think back to the conversation on the education this time on different fields. We use the technology to expand the possibility on the physical world. We don't use the technology just to replace it. I see this to be really just an amplifying chamber where we can see things that would require more. And this is one example. We can run it in multiple industries at the same time. One quick take on that. Some years back, a large retailing company was using some form of digital twins, let's say virtual reality to be precise, to try to determine when you're placing items into a shelf in the supermarket, will change in items depending on who is going to shop in the grocery store, change the consumption pace or change the cycle. These are questions that before you needed to have, a deployment into the physical world or even mystery shoppers. Today we can do it basically in immediate terms. So I am, I think, fascinated by the possibility to use digital twins to simulate hypotheses, rather than having this on a cost that might be difficult to justify over time.
No, I mean, it's a very simple sort of application, but just watching, we all watch television and you see the shows about how you can redesign your house or redesign your kitchen. And now they have the virtual reality to such an extent that you can, you really step into and see what it's going to look like before it's executed. And, you can see the applications are very powerful. It's certainly in terms of for architects, kitchen designers, not least, and those sorts of people. But although, I mean, I'm not sure whether that's the AI component, but it's certainly the virtual reality.
Yes.
So I've got a question from my friend Bogdan, who asks, could you expand on the use of blockchains in supply chains and link all to the ecology footprint mitigation globally? I think what Bogdan's, I might be wrong, but I think what Bogdan's getting at is the idea that we can use blockchain as a sort of sense of provenance to understand exactly what really is going on in supply chains. Because we all want to believe that that we're not buying clothes from. I think we all want to believe we're not buying clothes that have been sourced in sweatshops. But presumably, this sort of technology could be one way, or buying from cocoa farmers, buying chocolate and other products from cocoa farmers who've been treated fairly. That we could use blockchain to really have better visibility and transparency into the supply chains.
That's 100%. And Bogdan, thanks for the question. Actually, a few years back, when I was at the World Economic Forum, we had a report about traceability of supply chain for sustainability. And I think what we discovered, I tell you what I discovered, that I was like kind of blown away. The most blockchain industry in the world is the diamond industry, because in no moment whatsoever you can afford the stone to be actually replaced for a fake one. So the fear of the reputational damage of a fake diamond has pushed the industry, which you're dealing with a complex logistics, different location in the world. Some of them are, of course, the mining that is not an easy environment to operate, entirely blockchain. And so I've always been wondering, why don't we apply the same principle to more? And I think there is a number, first of all, I think is within the possibilities of what we think today blockchain can do, especially when we're expanding the infrastructure of the data that needs to be in place for this to be stored, in the computational capacity the country needs to have. I think, and this goes back to the first C of COVID-19 having expanded the internet. Now it's more possible, even in more peripheral part of the world, to use technologies that have a certain level of requirement for speed. The second thing is, of course, the moment that we are educating traceability as a value, it does change the price, but it also changes the engagement consumers have. And I think we've been exposed to the idea of companies with purpose. And this is one functional way to use purpose in an application, changing also the engagement we're having with consumers. I see this likely going to happen in a number of different fields, likely textile. There is a clear push about new materials and new plastic. And so it's likely that we will see this somehow in some of our labels. Of course, everything that is related to food gives itself a natural edge to be measured to blockchain. So I think your question is anticipating what likely will continue to expand and become more mainstream. And I also think it will finally rehabilitate blockchain to a functional use that is not only Bitcoin, it's more than that. And I personally find this going to be more and more deployed. To just to bit of expansion on that, there's also where AI can largely help. Before we were talking that in the research in the book, we discovered that with the expansion of the internet, we had the rise of Web3, and Web3 also gave access to what we call decentralized autonomous organizations, DAO. Now, you could have a part of the supply chain that runs through an autonomous algorithm, for example, payments, in which you don't have to have an accounting function for every single time that the item goes through one of the intermediary, right? You can largely automate that. Or you can start thinking about searching for the easiest way to disintermediate from producers to consumers, largely allowing many people in emerging economies to directly have access to the market, which I think is a great benefit we will really have to equalize the access of opportunities, which is a conversation we'll likely have also today. This technology are incredibly powerful. If used in the right way, they become equalizers, but the opposite is equally true. If they're used in the negative way, they become disequalizers.
Okay. I mean, I've got questions about trust, some of which we've been talking about in terms of how blockchain can affect that. But Sumana asked specifically, can we have some insights from your upcoming book? Very, very wise, really, because we've got you here. We've got a sneak peek. We should take full advantage of that. One of the kind of terms that you use in the book is design activists.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about design activists and how we can become.
Thanks for this. Thanks, Sumana, for asking the question. So, when we discovered the 5 C's under the umbrella of the cognitive economy, we didn't find specific predeterminations. We didn't find that this will happen no matter what. We found this is I tend to call it several times, direction of travel. Question is, direction of travel doesn't define the destination itself. So when you want to build it into a specific destination, you need a degree of activism that needs to be put in place so that we can use the power of technologies, the redefinition of our global order by understanding more player, much more multipolar world. This sort of like clear acknowledgement that we are converging and diverging at the same time. We're global and local. So this conversation, I think they all fit in. That really constitute the opportunity for a generation to become a design activist, so that once you define the direction of travel, well, how do you build that infrastructure of the world the way that likely will create more equity, more social justice, more environmental responsiveness, or eventually a carbon economy that will work better for us. I think this is what the book is meant to be, is a call for action. That's why the activism comes in, but not by incrementally trying to tweak or adjust the previous system. It's more about recognizing that likely we are in the presence of what we call a watershed moment in which another paradigm is emerging. And that paradigm requires the construction of the infrastructure of the world moving forward. So it's difficult as a book to be sometimes simplified into, for example, just the one soundbite. It's more about how do we engage with the different leaders and so like business and public policy specialists to really start rethinking and challenging our status quo, and that requires activism. So that's kind of I think an additional elements to the conversation that we had so far.
Okay, I'm going to go to the trust question. We've got a question from Noah. How do you see technologies? I know we've touched on this, but I'm going to ask the question in its full length. How do you see technologies increasing or decreasing the trust or distrust we are seeing both as individuals and between countries as we move forward? Will trust be broken, and can it be fixed? I mean, I think the fake news, some of the social media stuff, now that may not be directly the technologies we're talking about, but clearly that's part of the internet phenomenon. That's part of our experiences. Do you see the trust situation getting better or worse?
So I see this getting worse, and I think this. I'm happy that Noah is asking this question. I think there's a distinction that we need to carry between truth and information. And I mean, I grew up by I think thinking that truth has a higher value proposition than information itself because it was unequivocal. I think the moment that we started to surrender truth in favor of information, we started to create information echo chambers that are somehow self-regulated. So if you like content that is true or untrue, it doesn't change the economic engagement that you have on social media. And the challenge is, how do you regulate, but also how do you govern when you have in this scattered information chambers that are creating alternative reality? I think back in the days, I think they used to call it, alternative facts. So I think this is one of the challenges that I see with technology not being explicit about the fact that technology is an extension of the brain. But if you actually are using technology to insulate yourself from the world, you can. The challenge is that you take a flawed idea and you digitize it, so you amplify it at a much faster pace. This is why a part of the work I do, not necessarily in the book, but somehow in my other writing, is on the governance of technology, because it's so critical that we are able to regulate what otherwise seems to be just following some form of economic fluctuation, a like or dislike on social media. But that can create so many different, I would say, silos of information that's quite difficult to reconcile. And one quick, I think, reflection on this, to your point, Noah, look how fragmented the political spectrum is in many traditional democracies. That's because we kind of lost the space in the middle where we can debate. And that's because every single political party is representing, I think, its own unique view on things. And that is so insular from the opportunity for us to create a shared sense of reality. And that's, for me, is a danger that largely undermines democracy, if you want to see this more of on a dystopian view a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the dystopian view, but I mean, do you think that we can? I mean, as part of the idea of the book is that we can become more, what's the word, digitally aware, more open to the understanding what the pros and cons of technology are, because I think we seem to be very binary in this. You either love the technology, you hate the technology. I mean, it's both. It's both at the same time, and it's how we use it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one way for me to try to understand your question when I try to use in the practice every single day, is to try to understand that what I find to be maybe good in technology terms might not be good for somebody else. And so when I'm trying to say, well, why do we have so many variations of preferences? Because somehow the digital proposition doesn't come with trust automatically. And so it has to be built. So I think we have to maybe inaugurate or institutionalize the sense of digital trust. We need to be able to measure it so that we can eventually manage it and monitor it and track it. So the idea of trust as in digital format, what does it really mean? And I think there's a degree of literacy that needs to come out of that. I think that the literacy also needs to be in the understanding that algorithms are somehow, they could be largely biased. And therefore, I could be experiencing an expanded digital flow and I might not have the ability for me to eventually to like push back on this, because I might consider it to be normative just because it happens through a software. But what if the planning and the programming was mainly skewed towards a specific view of the world? And I think it goes back into the big conversation that we have on diversity, equity, inclusion, that I think is becoming popular around HR, but also many organizational theorists are looking at the new firm. The question is always about, well, how do we now build diversity, not only in terms of checking the box, but representation in the algorithmic capacity, so that an algorithm is diverse in its representation of the sample. And I think this is probably where we need to do, it's a quite significant amount of work that likely will mitigate this love and hate relationships, and likely going to see this more as, look, is ecosystemic, is the environment in which we are digitally exposed, and our life is digitally mediated, but by itself, digital is not neutral. We have to collectively define what's the design moving forward, which brings me back to the point that we were asking before when someone asked the question, well, how do we make that collective design a design activism for the kind of world we want to have? And that goes also in terms of technology in this case.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you managed to touch on unconscious biases, because we had a question on that. I couldn't possibly put all the questions to you. What it tells me, because we're out of time, is that we need to get you back and have another conversation like this at some point. So I look forward to that. But we are out of time. Huge thanks to Mark and to all of you for tuning in. Mark's book, The Great Remobilization: Strategies and Designs for a Smarter World, is published by MIT Press and is out on the 17th of October.
That's right. Yes.
Make sure you do get a copy. Where else can people go to find out about your work, Mark?
Well, look, I have a visible profile on media, so you find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. That's where I do most of my promotion. I would say that's probably the starting point. That's where I don't use Instagram. I find myself that I probably missed the curve. I'm too old for having understood exactly how to use it. So I'm sticking with Twitter and LinkedIn. That's where they can find a lot of the work. And my books are on Amazon. So if you want to see what I have done in the past, so there is that one coming in October, and another one in 2024 on digitizing the emerging economy with Cambridge University Press. And so it's sort of like trying to now build a more solid, I would say, consolidated narrative about what I really like to, considering that I went past the second part of my life. So I'm more cautious about how I spend my resources, which is in this case time.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, and I echo that. I know exactly. Well, I'm well ahead of you, I'm sure. Our guest next week will be Matt Johnson, Professor and Research Fellow at Hult International Business School, and also on the Thinkers50, a member of the Thinkers50 radar. Matt is a neuroscientist specializing in the application of psychology to marketing, so it'll be a great conversation. Mark, great to see you as ever, and I look forward to our next conversation.
With pleasure. All the best. Thank you for having me. Cheers. Bye-bye.